Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots of big stories breaking this morning. Also, by the way, it is nice to be back here.
It is fantastic.
Emily and Ryan did a wonderful job filling in for us, but great to be back in the chair. Lots of big news breaking this morning. First of all, there are rolling blackouts being instituted across Ukraine. Zelensky telling Ukrainians to conserve energy as much as possible after a bunch of Russian strikes. We also have reported Russian evacuations from one of those illegally annexed areas, Kherson. So we'll tell you about that. We also have big news from Biden on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, trying to get gas prices to go back down where they were and to stem the, they've been going up and up and up. So we'll get into all of that and what it means. Some new news out of the swing states. Georgia has early voting now in full effect, and they have had record-breaking turnout. It's actually quite astonishing, not just on the first day, also on the second day of early in-person voting. So what does that mean? We've got some new polls. We also have Democrats increasingly throwing each other under the bus and making excuses and trying to set the narrative for why it is not looking so good for them at this point. And also a mystery this morning. The FBI raided a prominent, award-winning journalist, national security journalist, in sort of stunning fashion too. They rolled in super hard with big equipment and almost like a tank. It was a crazy situation. No one knows exactly what's going on. So we'll tell you what we do know about that.
Okay, let's get to the actual show. Ukraine. Yes. So what is going on? It's been a while since we've been able to update everyone, and quite a bit of things have changed on the battlefield. In terms of the most immediate news, let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. Vladimir Putin declaring martial law in the occupied regions of Ukraine. There's been a lot made of this, and it is a pretty strange announcement. Essentially what he's done is, by declaring martial law in the regions, he has actually given the security forces there the power to the power in order to take over and evacuate the civilians from what is going to be clearly a very, very contested area. So what this essentially does is it gives the Russia's governors and these fake governors of these territories to, quote, maintain order, ensure supplies for the armed forces, aka be able to take whatever you want from the civilian population, and protect critical infrastructure. By that meaning they can do whatever they want. It's not like that wasn't already de facto the case, but the fact that they had to announce it does show that the situation here is dire, including, by the way, what was missed in that announcement by some people in the media is, if you look in Russian, something that Putin says is that not only are we going to have martial law, but, quote, other measures if necessary. Put this up there. So what do those other measures actually mean? Well, they could include, but not be limited to, sweeping censorship, wartime economic restrictions on things like the free flow of goods, services, and funds, according to existing Russian law, which means that they can seize whatever the hell they want. And we're moving closer, unfortunately, really, to almost a total war type situation, forced evacuations of the civilians, total mobilization of at least the population and its resources in that area, as Ukraine is making very stunning advances. Intelligence coming out this morning claiming, this is from the US, leaking, of course, to the New York Times and other establishment media outlets, that the advance on Kherson actually could come before the fall muddy season, when it's far too muddy in order to make any mobilization. We talked previously, November 15, around then, is historically when snow begins to fall in earnest and make it just completely unmovable in that area. So the window is closing on both Russia's ability to defend its existing territory and also on the Ukrainians' ability to advance.
So I read 18 news articles about this, martial law imposition, and none of them really made any sense. It was so unclear, because the one thing that's the most clear is that martial law declared in these 4, illegally annexed territories. Okay, that's sort of the most definitive. But then there are these other pieces of the border regions in Russia. There's kind of, sort of martial law. And then there's this other provision that's actually anywhere in Russia the governors can impose these measures. So, and I was trying to make sense of this with our friend Agor, and he was saying, basically, this is classic Putin. The war's not really a war. It's a special mobilization. They did a quarantine without calling it a quarantine. All these sorts of things where it's squishy, it's ambiguous, it's vague, it's not really clear what it means, it's not really clear what the implications are. It's not really clear how far they'll go. And so that's why when I was reading all of these Western news media accounts, it was so damn fuzzy to figure out what any of this means. That's because it was intentionally made to be really unclear.
Right.
I mean, I think the things that we can say for sure is, this gives them sort of more powers to crush dissent is another thing. This enables them to really shift those 4 illegally annexed territories into full mobilization in terms of their economy and all of those sorts of things. Like you said, being able to seize and do whatever they want in those regions. The other regions, it's entirely less clear exactly what it means. The potential path is that, this is sort of like the boiling the frog thing. You just keep making these steps a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more into full nationwide war mobilization. And that's sort of the fear of where this is going ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that's just inevitably where it's going to have to go, which is that Moscow doesn't have the ability right now to, quote, win the war in its current orientation. Ukraine, obviously, doing stunningly better than anybody had previously thought. So what you start with, and this is where you got to just really feel for the people who live in these regions. They're being used as pawns, no matter what, whether they're pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian. You're getting evacuated from your home and your entire area is being turned into effective battlefield wasteland. And, as the war continues to move towards that Russian border, which we'll get to in a little bit, well, frankly, it's a preview of what's to come, possibly in Crimea, all the border regions. We're going to talk about Belarus and more. So look, it's a bad situation. And on top of that, Putin has still got his domestic problems after the draft. Obviously, the regime survived, but go ahead and put this up there from Western journalists who are actually on the ground in Moscow. They're like, hey, where the hell have all the men in Moscow gone?
Yeah.
They're talking about visiting places like barbershops and other bars and areas where men used to frequent, and they have seen a precipitous drop in just the number of military-age males who are in the city. They've either fled or they are straight up on the battlefield. And already, we're seeing reports, Krystal, that some of the people who have been drafted after only 2 weeks of training, and we should be clear, the way that we think about the U.S. Army Reserves, that is not what's happening here. The people who got drafted are like people who did 1 year of mandatory military service, haven't picked up a rifle since.
Some of them not even that, according to the reports.
Right,
yeah.
And our guys, they go, I think it's once a month or something for training. Anyway, they're far better equipped and far more manageable on the battlefield.
Well, and they volunteered.
And they actually volunteered. Yeah, that's a whole other story. But anyway, so the people were essentially just thrust, put a rifle in their hands, went through some basic training. Already some of them are dead on the battlefield in the East, and we're seeing increasing signs of fighting. So look, no nation can survive this level of strife without coming out the other end significantly changed. What that looks like, I don't know. Is the Putin regime and all that going to survive? But I think that this martial law declaration in the East, in the eastern part of Ukraine, is a preview of what will come for total Russian society as the sanctions continue to bite away, as the winter is going to approach, and really just as the war continues to grind on. It is, as much as we talk about in Ukraine, the domestic populace's ability to survive this and continue either its support or, possible, not revolution necessarily, but riots and other areas of dissent, it all just becomes more and more likely as the Kremlin continues to double down. But no sign that they are abandoning doubling down. At every chance, Putin has decided to choose escalation.
Well, there is one sign that potentially they're moving the other direction, which is they at least officially announced that this latest mobilization is over.
Right.
That they've taken in all of the conscripts that they plan to for this wave. Is that true? Is it false? Who knows? But that's what they're pitching to the public. I think in part because there has been such upset and just mass exodus of men who are in hiding domestically, men who have already been shipped overseas, not overseas, into Ukraine, men who are already dying on the battlefield. So, there's at least an attempt to reassure the population that's as far as we're going to go right now. But yeah, the stories that are coming out of Moscow also paint a portrait of a drafting process that really focused on the people who were sort of the most vulnerable. There are reports coming out of clearing out homeless shelters, going after men of military age who are staying in hostels. So you get the idea. People who maybe don't have as much sort of roots or connections, who they think could easily be sent and have less blowback from the domestic population. We also covered that story about how rural areas were really heavily targeted, where it's, you know, it's more isolated. They're also fed more direct. They have nothing other than basically direct Russian propaganda that they're fed. They're more impoverished, and so there was an idea that, you know, those would be populations that would be easier to send as well. So that's, as best we can tell, what's going on in Russia domestically, but pretty stark. I mean, can you imagine being in a city where just all of a sudden, like, all of the military-age men are just gone? I mean, some of the numbers is kind of funny, but it's also really not funny. They talked about a local media report that attendance at one of the largest strip clubs in Moscow down by 60%. Fewer security guards available because they'd either been mobilized or fled. Lots of business owners who even, you know, those who decided, like, we're going to stay because we've got a responsibility to our employees or whatever. Now they're faced with a situation where half of their workforce is gone. Yeah. And so they are struggling to continue their operations, even though they had decided to stay, because so much of the population has vanished for one reason or another.
Yeah. Bottom line, the war is truly coming home to people in Moscow, across the country. And for the people who are in it, they are not just in it, they are now seeing their lives like more irrevocably changed than ever before.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.